before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about the Central Sensory Processes Lab. That
Mhm.
sounds like a really interesting place to be doing research. And you're a principal investigator there. Can you tell us a little bit about the lab and what kind of work you're doing there now?
Absolutely. So the name is a mouthful, but the reason I chose that name is because I didn't want it to be an auditory lab. I've done a lot of work in the visual system as well. And I have a great colleague, Garrett Carden. He's in Utah, and he has done a lot of work in the somatosensory system. And so I wanted it to be a lab that was open to all sensory studies. So that was why we chose the sensory part. And then the central part is because that's where, and this is my bias, that's where I think the magic happens in the system, is really the brainstem and the cortex. And so I wanted to give myself the freedom to investigate different modalities of sensory processing and how those modalities interconnect. So that's kind of how the lab came to be. Always my first love in neuroscience has been the mystery of tinnitus, or ringing in the ears, or hearing sounds that are not externally present. That's always fascinated me. So that's where I pivoted after I graduated with my degrees. Was I turned to tinnitus because I've always, it's kind of like the Wild West a little bit. We've done so much in research for that disorder and come so far, but the clinical aspect has remained stagnant for years. And how we test for this disorder, how we help to provide intervention, it's just hasn't moved. And so that's really been the focus of the lab. But we are also very interested in visual processing, looking at inhibition and how that applies to sound in both clinical and typical populations. I love studying development and working with children and seeing how their brains adapt and why they adapt in certain ways and maybe not others. So our lab is very open. I would say our focus right now is on tinnitus, but we have side projects as well.
It sounds as if any deep study of one sense ultimately ties into a
Yes.
study of another sense. Like there's
Yes.
not really a way to disconnect them. And so that, as you're saying, that central
Exactly.
processing aspect of it is so integral to the study of all the senses, which, you know, kind of is the idea around the Internet of Senses podcast series as
Right.
well. Is that there's this connection
Right.
between all the senses, and by bringing different people together, we can start to learn about those
Exactly.
connections.
Exactly. I mean, how we operate in the world, sensory wise, is astounding. I remember hearing a quote from a very accomplished neuroscientist who said that the more he learned and the older he got, he couldn't believe that we could get up and walk across the room because all that has to work together is just crazy. But when we do these experiments, everything is so titrated and specific to, unimodal processing and whatnot, which is necessary to understand things at an initial level. But really, to me, the interesting thing is, as you said, everything ties together. If we're looking at auditory function, it doesn't happen alone. Again, the visual system is so complementary to it. So it's difficult to separate those things.
You can